What is up, YouTube? Today we're looking at whether Serum can wavefold. So I'm not going to go into a full explanation of exactly what wavefolding is. If you want to find out about it, I'm sure there's plenty of resources online where you can do so. Wavefolding is something that you do find quite often in modular synthesis, and because I'm not an expert in the field, I kind of bounced a few ideas off Stacy at Hex Inverter Electronique, who are module manufacturers, and he gave me a couple of ideas as to how I could maybe achieve this process in Serum. So first things first, I just want to clear up for all those kind of purists and stuff out there. This isn't exactly wavefolding, but due to the fact that with Serum you can actually build your own waves from scratch, you can actually get some really convincing stuff out of it. So I'm going to show you guys what I came up with, and we're going to go into recreating it again from scratch. So let's dive in and have a look. So the effect that this creates when used with FM particularly is something that you find often more in the sort of more nighttime, forest, dark sky sort of stuff. And I've been getting a lot of requests to do sound design tutorials on this type of sound, and a lot of the time it actually employs wavefolding techniques. So I figured I'm going to nip it in the bud and do a sort of two-in-one, you know, can Serum wavefold, as well as show you guys how to create a sort of foresty nighttime sort of FM lead. So let's open a new instance of Serum. So I want to show you guys one of the sort of many beauties of what wavefolding can do. One of the ways to sort of best outline that is probably going to be with a sine wave. So let's just start with a basic sine wave. And because this sort of technique, or the way that I'm going to be doing this, uses this sort of wavetable editor, I'm actually just going to build the sine wave here rather than having to load a patch. And it's pretty cool. I'm going to show you guys one of the ways of creating your own sort of bank of waveforms. You know, in a previous video, I outlined it slightly differently, where you sort of take something like basic shapes and remove some of the existing waveforms. So what you could do here is, for example, just click add, and then using this formula function, you could enter the formula for a sine wave. Serum's actually got a bunch of like built-in formulas. So that would be a very quick way to create, you know, some basic shapes that you probably use quite often, rather than having to open basic shapes and remove some waveforms. Anyway, that's not the idea of this tutorial. I figured I would just let you guys know, because that's something pretty interesting. So we've got a sine wave. So essentially what wavefolding is adding harmonics to a waveform. So I guess it could be done using these sort of partial editors at the top here, but because of the way that I want to sort of create a sort of morph table, I'm going to create separate snapshots of different sort of harmonic tables, which we can then morph through. So if you're not following, I kind of also don't really understand too much about the mathematics of this side of things, but I'm going to show you guys what I figured out. So let's press plus over here, and then over here what we want to do is, so essentially here with this wave we want to create a sort of 3-octave sine wave, and then what we're going to do is we're going to morph from the 1 octave to the 3 octave, if that makes sense. So how we can do that is we can either go and we can edit it here, we can change the partials or whatever, but this is probably the easiest way, is you just edit the actual formula over here by adding in 3 times. So the formula would be sine in brackets x times 3 times pi. And that's created, you know, what would look like a sort of folded version of the original waveform. However, the phase is slightly out, but I'm going to show you guys a little trick that Serum has built in shortly. First, what we're going to want to do though is let's create another one, like a 5-octave version, for example. So we can add, and then we can just go and edit this 3 and punch in a 5 over here, and there we go. So now, because wavefolding is obviously like a sort of analog process, you kind of get, you've got a varying amount of harmonics that you add to the original one. We want to create a morph table between these 3 waves that we've created here. So all of these different morph tables create different kind of final effects, I could say. The one that I found that actually emulates wavefolding, once you've done this entire process, is this morph spectral 0 all phases. So what it does is it makes sure that the phases are aligned in those kind of snapshots. So now, if we go back to the main window of Serum and we have a look at our sort of wavetable position, it's starting to look quite a lot like wavefolding. But there is one problem. In between our snapshots, we're getting a loss of amplitude. So what we can do is we can actually go back into the wavetable editor, click process, and normalize each gained separately. So now what it's done is each snapshot in that morph table, it's normalized so that the sort of tip of the waveform on both sides is reaching maximum amplitude. So now that actually looks exactly like wavefolding. We've created a wavefolder inside Serum. The cool thing about this is it's not an actual effect. So now we've got the ability to sort of duplicate this onto oscillator B and do some interesting sort of relationships between these new wavefolder oscillators that we've created. Quite similar to how you would be able to kind of break apart the sound design process in the sort of modular environment with wavefolding, except, like I said, this isn't an actual effect. This is more like, you know, generating the waveforms. But yeah, I digress. This is what I came up with. So now what we can do is we can save the wavetable that we've created and we can open it up on oscillator 2. Sometimes when you open up the waveforms again, you may have to go in and normalize them like that. I'm not sure why. Once you save it, it doesn't save the sort of normalizing thing. I guess you could probably save it as a wave and then re-import it or something like that, but that'd be getting too technical for this tutorial. I'm just showing you guys how to quickly create the sound. So what I want to do is I'm just going to generate a random MIDI pattern. I've actually got one here which I've generated using Riffer plugin. If you haven't checked it, I have done a video on it, so you should definitely check it out. It's a very, very cool plugin. I'm just going to pop that MIDI in there. It was randomly created. It's just one note. I'm actually going to shift it down to B. So I'm going to transpose it down -1 and pop it on there. So yeah, it's just random velocities and stuff which we can then set to different sort of modulations within Serum. So firstly, I want to show you guys the difference between, you know, just a sine wave and then the sort of folded sine wave. You kind of get like this kind of almost saw wave type characteristic in between here. So it doesn't sound all that fantastic until we start applying some FM to the sounds. So let's put FM from B on oscillator A's warp mode. And then we can turn the volume down on oscillator B. And then let's play around with this a little bit. It's quite amazing to imagine the sort of tonal capabilities that you can create using just sine waves and this very simple sort of wave morphing technique. You know, there's no effects, there's no filters or anything here, but we've created an incredibly metallic sound that we can sweep all the way from sine to this kind of like really robotic kind of metallic sound to a kind of more bubbly sound. You know, there's this huge palette of sonic possibilities when using, you know, simple waveforms and then applying sort of additive techniques as opposed to how most people kind of envision sound design, which is more of a sort of subtractive sort of approach. That being said, is I'm still going to apply some filters and stuff like that just to kind of fine tune the sound and get the most out of it. So I mean, like this, let's just see how this sounds, like fine tune this, try get a good sound out of this, and then we'll start looking at maybe adding some filters and what sort of filters are used the most in the sort of foresty nighttime sort of stuff. We'll look into that now. So here it's very cool to apply that velocity from the sort of random MIDI clip that we created in Riffer to something like the FM amount. And then you kind of get this kind of wide change in the timbre of the sound, as opposed to something that we used to, like that our ears are used to, something like velocity doing something like volume change or filter change or something like that. Cool, that's sounding good. So I would say one of the most sort of common filters that you'd find in this type of stuff is the bandpass filter, because it has that like wide sweep all the way down from the bottom to the top. If you're not really familiar with what a bandpass filter is, it's kind of just boosting a very slim range of frequencies, as opposed to like a low pass filter or a high pass filter, which only adjusts like either the low or the high frequencies and sweeps up to that point. The band pass is kind of like much more of a focused range of sounds. So you're able to get much more of a sort of sweepy kind of sound going. I'm not sure if that's a great explanation of it, but you're going to hear now what I'm talking about. Cool. So that's pretty much it in terms of like the sound design. I mean, there's, like I said, there's such a huge variety of different kind of textures you can get by just sort of changing the wavetable position and this frequency modulation amount, or by changing the velocity of the actual notes themselves in that progression. Changing these octaves as well. You know, if it's up, you'll get more of a sort of robotic sound. If it's down, you'll get more of a sort of bubbly sound, if that kind of makes sense. But then here with the actual sound itself, often when I'm using bandpass filters, you get a very sort of much of a boost in resonant, like sort of distortion in the high frequencies. I'm not sure if that's the correct word for it, but I like to counteract that with a equalizer. I mean, just like simple settings, I'll apply a high shelf, quite a drastic one usually, as well as a high pass filter, usually around the sort of 225 to 250 region. Cool, so let's add some delay here. I've explained my delay process quite a bit on this channel, so I'm not going to go too in depth with it. You can kind of pause and copy if you want. Cool, that's sounding good. Let's slap on wider, see how that affects the sort of overall atmosphere of the sound, you know, whether it kind of boosts the sort of forestiness or not. Awesome. So to answer that question, yes, Serum can kind of wavefold. A big thanks to IDM Mag, proud supporters of the dance music scene and my channel. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed that. Hope you learned something. Let me know what you think in the comments. As always, I'm going to be uploading this preset to my Patreon for my $5 supporters. So if you want to know what that's all about, head on over to the link that's somewhere on the screen right now. As always, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. See you guys next time.